You're in the Business Insurance Zone with me, Steve Savant, national financial columnist and financial color commentator. This week on The Biz, the Asset Protection Series, and on today's show, the basics of asset protection with national columnist and attorney at law, Ike Devji.
When it comes to life insurance, annuities, long-term care, disability, or group pension plans, we're the news you can use.
Well, welcome everyone to the Business Insurance Zone. I'm your host, Steve Savant, and we're broadcasting live to a nationwide audience of financial advisors right here in Fountain Hills, Arizona, home of America's largest fountain. And with me today, day 2 of our saga on asset protection, attorney and national author, Ike Devji. You know, Ike, the reason I'm laughing is because everybody that I talk to knows we're supposed to be doing all this. And yet, there's such a minority in our population that actually do what we're talking about on the show, and it really matters. So I'm always surprised when we get through this. We're going to get email, we're going to receive the kind of traffic we get on the internet just because we're talking about basic concepts. Now, if I'm going to get ready to meet with an attorney, and remember, many of our viewers, this may be their first time talking to an attorney, and they want to talk about basic will, and in a moment we'll get into revocable living trust. Tell me, what do I need to prepare for my first meeting?
I think there's a good standard basic list of things that we typically would ask a client to bring to a meeting. I'll get into that list in just a second, but I also think it's important that the folks coming in, let's assume for a moment that we're talking about a married couple, have a conversation about these issues at home before they come in as well. Because it's important. When they come in, somebody like me is going to ask them specific questions. It's a good idea if you've thought about some of those issues beforehand. Well,
so can you give us, can you send to the client before we meet with these lists of questions that they need to discuss before they see you?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that conversation is an important precursor to the meeting itself and to even completing the list. So some of the most basic things on the list would be, number one, if you have minor children, who do you want the guardians of those children to be? That's one of the key and most important issues. Number two, if there are minor children who require that they have somebody who is appointed to manage the assets of the estate, the property, the investments, the other things that you might be leaving behind for their benefit, is the person who you appointed as the guardian equally qualified to handle the money?
So there might be two different people.
They could be two different people, because remember, somebody who might be the best caregiver might not be the best money manager. And so sometimes we need to divide those things, sometimes we don't. But that's a question that's individual to every family. Another important and key issue is a list of the assets that you're leaving. What is it that you want the attorney's help to handle and distribute? The attorney can only give you good advice and create provisions and create documents based on what you give him. It's a garbage in, garbage out kind of analogy. If you give us a great deal of complete information of all of the assets that we need to be advising you about disposing of, then we can provide the best advice.
And we have to go through an inventory of our entire house. There's things in there when I started looking through, I said, I forgot about that. I forgot about that. I had to go through like I was doing a property casualty audit for my protection of my home, my homeowner's insurance policy, just to say, well, look at all these things I would have never thought about.
That is absolutely correct. And people always underestimate the value of the personal property and the personal items that they have in their home, and they don't think about those things until it's often too late. I want my father's gold watch to go to my oldest son. I want my mother's wedding ring to go to my daughter. Those kinds of things that have great emotional value are also many times the subject of conflict between families.
No, things like this, are we starting to move towards the revocable living trust, which is really a potpourri of many documents inside it?
It is. And one important question that we help clients figure out is, do I need a will or a trust? And so that distinction is important. But let's move to the trust for a moment. And as you said, the trust is not one thing. A good revocable living trust is in fact a collection of a series of documents that help control all of the things that you've talked about. It will include the vital issues of the healthcare powers of attorney and living will that you mentioned. It will include a choice of a guardian for minor children. It will include the choice of a trustee who is responsible for the disposition of the assets in the estate. It has a number of different documents that form that, and that is why it has been such a powerful and effective tool. And it is within the reach of most people.
Mm-hmm. Well, when I think about a living trust, I think of, and I'm probably just the same as any consumer, I think, hey, it's one doc, 3-4 pages long, I fill it out and I'm done. But you're saying it's a collection of all these. And do they have to integrate? Do they have to be part, to kind of work in synergy?
Absolutely, Steve. That's a great point. We don't want things that are created at different times by different people with a different view of the grantor, the person creating the will or the trust, and what their estate is. They must absolutely work together. There shouldn't be any conflict inherent to the document, and it should be clearly stated as to who receives what, when, how.
How many times should I look at this as we're heading to the end of the segment? How many times do I need to update this and do a review?
There are a kind of standard set of life changes that attorneys look at. Have you had another child? Have you had a change, significant change in the assets that the trust or will was created to address?
So basically we're talking about life events that are going to dictate and change the way we think about things. And really there's a whole list that if you go out to our site, we'll give you a list of all the life events that would really be helpful to take to this, to your first attorney's meeting. We'll be right back after the break with Ike.
You're listening to the insurance industry's #1 resource for products, planning ideas, carrier information, and interviews you can use. When it comes to life insurance, annuities, long-term care, disability, or group pension plans, we're the news you can use.
Well, welcome back to the Business Insurance Zone. I'm Steve Savant with Ike Devji. And remember, you can sign up and order today's support materials at our website, thebiz.tv. And just a heads up, before moving forward with any of the ideas you hear on our show, always consult your attorney and tax advisor. And if you're FINRA licensed, always check in with your broker-dealer compliance officer. And we're walking through the basic asset protection strategies in our asset protection series with Ike Devji, attorney at law and national consultant and author. And I've seen you in a lot of magazines, Ike, and especially at the higher end with doctors, physicians, attorneys, different people that really use your services for asset protection. But when we're talking in a regular show like this, I'm really looking at the list now. We talked about the list in some of the things we wanted in a will, but when we talk about a revocable living trust, and I'm assuming that the word revocable means you can change it.
That's exactly it.
And now that's why I always get afraid about using the word irrevocable or irrevocable, depending upon your pronunciation. But a revocable, you could change your mind where you're still in good mind. You have the mental capacity to make this happen. So it's not in concrete. But how many documents? I mean, there's so many documents that are inserted in this trust. It's, as you said in the last segment, there's several. For us to prepare our next steps, what are those documents going to be so that we can be ready to go with our attorney?
That's a great question, because as you said, the revocable living trust is the sum of its parts. Some of the basic parts would include the dispositive provisions that you would find in a will. So for instance, who gets what, when, and how. That's number one. Number two, it often, or almost always, designates a specific trustee. People, it could be a living person, or it could be a corporate entity. That is a professional fiduciary that is responsible for executing the wishes expressed and conducting and closing the estate's affairs.
Could it be one of your children?
It absolutely can be a beneficiary.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Steve, that's a really good question, and it's really specific to each individual family. Every family might have two children of close age. One might be exceptionally responsible and have a great deal of financial acumen, and the other one might be a little bit more of a free spirit who is not as good as hanging on to money.
Oh, you say that so delicately, Ike. Very political. Okay, so what else do I need then?
I would say that the healthcare powers of attorney, the living will portions, the things that we talked about earlier, those things are covered in great detail. The attorney will ask clients if they want, for instance, extraordinary measures, if they want to be kept on life support, what kind of pain management they would like to have as part of their treatment program.
Wait. You just crossed my line there on that one. So you can tell inside your revocable living trust on one of your docs, you can actually dictate how far up you're willing to live on whatever medication, high-end pain medication. I'm sorry, but that's new to me. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, the physician's job, and because of the liability issues that doctors face as well, is to keep this person alive no matter what, no matter how devastating the injury, no matter how devastating the illness might be, no matter how much capacity they might lack. There are many people who decide that if they're completely incapacitated or have a certain level of pain that will always be part of whatever future they have left in the event of something dramatic happening, that there are measures that they do or do not want to subject their bodies and their families to. So there's a lot of minute detail there, and it can get right down to that level.
Wow. That's very specific. I mean, that's managing it pretty tight.
It is managing it pretty tight. So that means that the conversations that you suggested that we have earlier before we have these meetings are that much more important when designating someone with the trust of literally having your life in their hands.
What other documents am I going to see in the overall revocable living trust?
You're going to see in some cases things like an AB bypass trust, which is a way to control assets between spouses so that the surviving spouse and the living spouse have taken advantage.
No, I'm curious about that because I thought the marital deduction that comes with it, the act that was done in 1981, I thought that already did that for us.
You know, there are certain provisions that we put into advanced estate planning documents depending on the size of the estate, the complexity of the estate. If it's a blended family, there are other issues that we may look at. We're seeing this more and more commonly where we have people who are independently successful meeting later in life with children and assets that are going to be distributed to different people in different ways. So all of these things come into play, and it's a very individual determination, which is why that we don't like people using form documents that may or may not really conform to their life, their family, their reality.
Well, I have a question because I saw this on one of our questions. What is a pour-over will?
A pour-over will is basically a way to include assets in the estate and address their disposition and assign control and beneficiaries for things that were not explicitly included in the main estate planning document.
Is that like a document that's post-mortem? You already did your revocable trust and then you found other items that you need to insert? Or I'm trying to figure this out because it seems like it's an add-on.
It is and it isn't. For instance, when most people create a revocable living trust, they hit all the big stuff. Where does the house go? Where do the investment accounts go? All of the big things. But there are many other things that may be of significant either financial or emotional value that should be addressed and can be encompassed in that way.
All these things are what we're talking about with Ike Devji, and now we've prepared you to meet with your attorney. And remember, you can watch this show and all our shows by going out to our website at thebiz.tv. Just sign up on our homepage. Well, that's the buzz on the biz for today. You've been in the zone, the business insurance zone.
You're listening to the insurance industry's #1 resource for products, planning ideas, carrier information, and interviews you can use. When it comes to life insurance, annuities, long-term care, disability, or group pension plans, we're the news you can use.